I'm Michael Cade. I'm a senior technologist at Kasten by Veeam. I've been at Veeam for 7 years, talking about all of the whole stack around Veeam, and more recently focused specifically on the Kubernetes and the cloud native journey that we're now in from a Kasten point of view. Like I say, we're going to touch on the 2022 update. So where are we now? Obviously, we're coming up to another KubeCon EU, but I wanted to get everything that we have on the truck out there so that you're all aware of what we're doing. So to begin with, everything that we're focused on is around data management within a Kubernetes, within the Kubernetes space. So whether that is backup and recovery, and I'm going to touch on some of that area as well shortly, but more importantly around application mobility, being able to send workloads from one cluster to another without really caring what that underpinning infrastructure looks like. So being storage agnostic, but also cloud platform agnostic, roll your own Kubernetes. Really the premise of what we're doing there is being completely agnostic to whatever that application and whatever that stateful workload looks like. And then also added on top of that data management challenge is around disaster recovery. So, and they all generally serve the same purpose of data management, about getting data from A to B, but it's also around that automation of being able to spin that up when you need it at that time of real need, especially when it comes to the disaster. So a look back over what we did last time. There's a couple of QR codes. More recently, CFD 12, that was where I was talking about the VBR and the K10 integration for those that have a wider footprint, virtualization, cloud-based infrastructure, as well as Kubernetes that need that one interface, or at least that start of that one interface to be able to protect and have those that ability to protect those workloads. And then I also probably spent most of the time looking at our new Kubernetes learning platform. And it is really Kubernetes. It's not K10. There is some K10 in there, but the focus was, and it was a key takeaway from KubeCon EU 2020, or 2021 rather, where the big takeaway was around education. People attending for the first time and not really understanding or wanting to learn more about Kubernetes as a platform. So we felt the need that we needed to come up with a free resource to be able to provide that and help the community learn more about the building blocks around Kubernetes and cloud native. Then if we go back to the summer, already mentioned, but this was really about understanding the key fundamentals of how K10 was put together. And Tom's going to go into a bit more of a continuation of that in his session later, as well as touching on DR automation. So I mentioned how one of those big pillars was around disaster recovery. So Michael Corsi, one of our solutions architects, he covered around disaster recovery with K10 between multiple Kubernetes clusters. And then also a big part of everything that we're doing is about protecting data services, whether it's databases, whether it's messaging queues, whether it's batch processing, just general data within the Kubernetes cluster, or whether it's an application leveraging data outside, such as AWS RDS. But in particular, Michael went on and spoke about protecting Kafka, which is a pretty complex data service in itself, but by using K10 and under the hood using an open source project that we maintain called Canister as well to be able to protect that. They're the links to the Cloud Field Day content. So just to look back, and those that there's a lot of familiar faces out there as well, in that those that have been and heard us talk about Veeam's roadmap, it's a highlight to always look back about what we've delivered. So if we go back to 3.0 and obviously before then, but if we start there, it was very much a focus around the backup and recovery was first. How do we protect the workloads? And then we move into, okay, how do we, and what are the challenges that our customers are facing at that point? And the first one to highlight here is around the transformation engine. So being able to manipulate what that application configuration looks like, whether it was in EKS and then being able to spin it up in GKE or another Kubernetes cluster. Then there was the trend around multiple clusters being used, and this is what I'm really going to touch on during my next session, as well as multi-tenancy. Then a big feature for 2021 was around ransomware protection, but being able to provide immutability. Again, those that follow the Veeam story. That's been a very big topic for us. And any data management software vendor or hardware vendor out there has, again, been focused on ransomware. We've obviously seen a lot of it over the last few years, as well as ecosystem scale, but also ecosystem in terms of working with and not having to reinvent the wheel ourselves, like being able to leverage things like Prometheus or Grafana and other cloud native tools and projects to be able to leverage them rather than us building our own. Also a big focus around edge. I know Enrico, you mentioned a lot around edge, and we're absolutely seeing that from an adoption, and Glenn as well. So we wanted to make sure that we were having those conversations with our customers and getting that feedback, and then that comes in with things like being able to protect K3S, that is a likely edge distribution of Kubernetes. One of the other thing, and I'm going to touch on a bit more of the 4.5 piece as we walk through. So observability and visualization and external monitoring and alerting. That observability piece, that monitoring visualization, was something that we were lacking. So we put some massive amounts of effort into that over the back end of 2021 to give us more of that functionality so that our users can actually see a lot more of what's going on. So Onka's going to deep dive into some of that. And then something that we touched on in the last sessions, but obviously I wanted to highlight them again, is integrating into external data services. So our blueprints that help us to dive into the application layer. So whether that's MySQL, Postgres, Amazon RDS, Kafka, for example, blueprints allow us to dive into that and be application aware to be able to take that back up. And that's something we covered in that last session. And again, just making that simpler so that people can roll their own blueprints and be able to protect whatever that data service needs to be. Also on top of that, and Tom's going to cover a lot more around operators in general, is the native RDS piece that I've mentioned a few times, if you haven't noticed, but then also the Cassandra. So an operator in terms of being able to run a database as an operator within your Kubernetes cluster. And Tom's going to look at that from a much higher level than just obviously this little bit of the slide. So out of box, observability, end-to-end visualization. And when it comes to that, it's very small tweaks inside the UI. Being able to link into, so prior to 4.5, we had the ability to send our metrics off to Prometheus, whether that be our own deployed Prometheus within our Kubernetes cluster, within K10, or being able to push that out to an external Prometheus that everyone's using for other metrics as well. We added the ability to send that or use those metrics in Grafana so that we got a better visualization to that. So from a Kasten K10 point of view, I kind of mentioned this, is that we're agnostic. We don't really mind what that underpinning storage is. We don't really mind what that underpinning Kubernetes distribution is either. We're agnostic to that as well as the storage. And I'm going to touch on some of these as we go through the demos as well. But ultimately, a big year for that edge piece was one around K3S, then Amazon EKS Anywhere, and then Cisco with their Intersight, and that's more around the deploying of those environments.